Bob, thanks as always. So strategy is a dirty word, and why it doesn't have to be so. Aperture Strategy, which clearly is Jason and Andrew, is a business which they formed together. Interesting, you'll probably read quite a lot of that stuff, but let me just remind you that they established Aperture Strategy 20 years after first coming together as the plans team for the UK's first response military headquarters. Their experience and education has given them a unique perspective on the practical changes with strategy design and implementation, and more importantly, how they might be addressed. So it's a key subject, and both guys have got tremendous military backgrounds, which are mentioned with at some length within the blurb which I sent out to you. So let's learn more and look forward to it. Over to Andrew and Jason. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Stephen, and thanks very much for offering us the opportunity to be here this evening. Fellow members of the Leaders Club, thank you for obliging us tonight. You know, it used to be that one would thank an audience for coming out in such filthy weather, but I think in these virtual days it's worse. Now you've got to turn off the TV and away from all those other distractions of home and come out to listen to us. Thank you for doing so, and I hope we live up to your expectations. As I say, we're very pleased to be here. It's a privilege for us and not a little daunting to talk about strategy this evening, not least because as leaders, everyone here has a clear view and lots of experience about strategy. We're therefore also excited to be here tonight in order to hear what you have to say about strategy. Your questions and observations in a short while are for us the most important part of this evening. We may be slightly contentious in our presentation, in the hope we'll simulate some discussion. Although it might seem otherwise, we're not Statler and Waldorf, or even Morecambe and Wise, although I know that might date us. I'm afraid there are a few belly laughs this evening, but there's a little heavy lifting to do, and we hope it will be worth the effort. Jason and I, as you heard, first worked together 20 years ago, when we wore military uniform and we were appointed together to form the plans team of the Ministry of Defence First Response Headquarters. Our role was to deploy anywhere in the world, perhaps at a few hours' notice, in order to assess a critical situation and develop initial plans for UK engagement. As you might imagine, this was an exciting and wholly engaging responsibility. Around doing our core job in places like Afghanistan, Iraq, Sudan, Sierra Leone, Indonesia, Lebanon, and the DRC, we also thought hard about the way military strategy was designed and implemented. As a result, we had the great privilege to have some small influence over the development of UK military planning and the doctrine. In our later military careers, both Jason and I remained engaged with the formulation and effect of military strategy, together and in parallel at the Ministry of Defence, Foreign Office and Cabinet Office with different prime ministers. Since then, I've enjoyed 10 years of strategic engagement with major corporates and governments in the Middle East and Africa, while Jason continued to follow the flag, or should I say ensign. When Jason retired from the Royal Navy a couple of years ago, we joined forces again to offer our unique experience of strategy with our startup consultancy, Aperture.
So, what we offer tonight is a view of strategy through our lens. We split our agenda into two parts. First, we steal the phrase from General Melchett and suggest that strategy is a dirty word in many places. We explore the reasons why we think strategy has developed a bad name. We'll then make a few suggestions about how we think the cynicism around strategy might be dispelled. More importantly, we'll then invite your questions and comments. At this point, we should be very clear. Strategy is design and implementation excites us. We believe in it absolutely. We certainly don't think it's a dirty word, but in our experience, the public and private sectors over the last 25 years or so, there are two words which senior leaders are uncomfortable with: process and strategy. Why should this be so? Simply put, there is a widely held view that strategy, more specifically the process of developing strategy, is lengthy, complicated, and suffocating for senior leaders particularly. By losing patience with the process, they lose faith with the kind of deliberate strategy development. More importantly, many people's experience of deliberate strategy development is disappointing in its resulting effect. In 2019, PwC published the findings of a survey of more than 6,000 international corporate leaders and managers, asking for their opinions on strategy development and execution. Only 37% of the respondents said that their organization had a clearly defined strategy. Only 35% of those thought that their existing strategy would lead to any success. In other words, only a tenth of senior business leaders had any faith in the strategy process. The report was called the Strategy Crisis. So how can this be so? PwC indicated that companies with coherent strategies were twice as profitable and 3 times the growth rate of those without. Yet hundreds, perhaps thousands of books, papers, analyzing every detail of theory and practice. Here's a few on Andrew's floor the other day. Search Google for strategy and you'll find over 5 trillion results. The senior leaders are experienced, educated, and engaged. Despite this, there is a very clear and very real negative reinforcing loop in play. Leaders lose faith in strategy, therefore strategy is set to fail. Therefore, more leaders lose faith in the strategy, and so on. So what is going wrong? We're not going to offer a list of conventional wisdom to suggest the problems with strategy. Our observation is that strategy has developed a bad name for 3 main reasons. First, strategy has lost its function and diluted its form. Strategy tries to be everywhere and everything. Second, organizations focus too much on internal factors without understanding the place of the internal and external system and how it interacts with them and around them. Third, strategies fail to account for complexity. They are also too rigid and stand much chance of success. Like Mike Tyson is supposed to have said, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth.
So we suggest that the first problem is what Hugh Strawn has called the banality of strategy. Strategy has lost its function and diluted its form. Everyone has a strategy. Everything around planning is regarded as strategy. Indeed, planning and strategy are words that are interchangeable, but that's another problem. The same company may have a marketing strategy, a sales strategy, an improvement strategy, an HR strategy, and an investment strategy. Perhaps the public sector is the worst offender. Every Department of State has a number of different strategies. Strategy should bring focus and cohesion, and its proliferation and overuse has diffused both its contribution and its reputation. A defined organization might have numerous plans, but they should be encased in a single strategy. This takes us to the semantic problem of definition. If strategy is everywhere and everything is strategy, then it's also sadly true that strategy tries to do everything everywhere. There are dozens of definitions of strategy. Most of the early versions focused on the military use of the term. A recent review, we counted 75 different ones. Many of these definitions use various combinations of terms such as plans, actions, aspirations, choices, requirements, and policies. So which theory of strategy does one follow? In 1962, one of the original gurus of strategic management, Alfred Chandler, defined strategy as the determination of the basic long-term goals and objectives of an enterprise and the adoption of courses of action and the allocation of resources necessary for carrying out those goals. This remains one of the most commonly accepted definitions of strategy in use today. Goals, resources, actions. Is strategy really all those things? The Harvard Business Review recently defined strategy as the practice of translating your organization's vision and purpose into a set of specific goals, and then developing plans and actions to achieve them. Goals, plans, actions. Even Richard Rumelt, author of Good Strategy, Bad Strategy, has defined strategy as a set of actions that is credible, coherent, and focused on overcoming the biggest hurdle in achieving a particular objective, actions. All risks creating a muddle between developing the concept and delivering the activity. A probable result of this muddle, at least in part, is that, as many commentators note, strategies often fail simply because they're not strategies. In a piece for the Harvard Business Review in 2017, Freek Vermeulen bemoaned the number of strategies that are actually just statements of aspiration. Strategy is not vision. It's not a budget or a financial target, and it isn't a to-do list. And yet time after time, strategies fail because that is all they really are. Strategy needs a focus. Rumelt argues that the core component of a coherent strategy is that it needs to focus on a particular challenge. Neither will strategy be effective, of course, if it just focuses on a symptom of the overall challenge. Without clearly stating what that challenge actually is and analysing its potential impact and character as far as is possible to do, there can be no prospect of effective strategy. So, is strategy goals, resources, choices, actions, plans, or all of the above? And what is its purpose? Competitive advantage, change, growth, a particular challenge? No wonder there's confusion. Architects endlessly debate whether function follows form or form follows function, or perhaps in the view of Frank Lloyd Wright, form and function are one. Without wishing to do this analogy to death, it's said that only a very talented architect can achieve this marriage of a beautiful form with a perfect function, or so his architect wife tells me. So it is with strategy. Through misalignment, misunderstanding, and mismatch of form and function, strategy has become banal, diluted, and confused. Hence, strategy and any process that purports to deliver it simply and effectively has become a dirty word.
A second area of real concern is that many strategy methodologies focus more on the internal characteristics of an organization than the external environment. This is often seen by reversion to measuring performance or productivity rather than effect. Admittedly, this is not the case for all such processes, but even if there is an attempt to acquire a strategic fit and analyze the external environment early in the process, it is often not carried through the rest of the planning process and still less into implementation. Thus, organizations that employ analysis such as Porter's 5 forces, which does consider the external environment, usually then fail to take into account the potential, indeed the certainty, for change in that environment once the battle is joined, the product is launched, or the service offered. Again, even if a strategy does make the effort to understand the external environment, many then assume that this environment will behave in some predictable way, such as a strategy. Once a strategy is initiated, mostly, of course, it doesn't act in that predictable way. One of the reasons why dealing with the external environment is so challenging is that it's much more difficult to change that than the internal environment. As one respected strategy textbook argues, that organizations cannot directly change the external environment. However, they can respond to those changes. This leads to a definition of the strategic fit, focusing on the degree to which an organization matches its internal resources and capabilities to the opportunities of the existing external environment. But that fit is often fixed in time. So change how the organization does things to suit what is believed to be the requirement of the market or external environment is fine. But what about what the organization wants from that environment? Dare it aspire to change it or shape it? We therefore see a disturbing number of strategy methodologies and tools focus too much on the internal environment alone, losing those which are sufficiently enlightened to even seek strategic fit are subject to two challenging pitfalls. First, have they analyzed the strategic environment correctly in order to align their internal structures with the processes and process to it? And secondly, their expectation that the external environment will not change its character in the future. This cedes the initiative to environmental forces and, to a significant and damaging extent, treats the internal environment and external environment as two separate, distinct systems. And so even strategies that attempt to align the internal and external environments are potentially hold below the waterline, unless they are cognizant of these two traps. If and when these flaws become realized, the strategy stalls. Organizations too often resort back to energetic leadership to drive the crippled vessel forward.
Our third main area of concern is what we call the Newtonian approach to strategy. Many, if not most, approaches to strategy are mechanistic and linear, neatly moving from some form of analysis of the current situation to a set of actions that will realize established goals. In execution, organizations expect their intended actions to realize their goals and often spend more time measuring their own performance than understanding the effect of those actions on their environment. Such an approach rests on prediction and is therefore inherently flawed. In a paper for the Academy of Management as long ago as 1985, Ellen Chaffee described three basic methodologies of process. The first of these she called linear strategy and characterized it as producing decisions, actions, and plans focused on directly connecting the ends of strategy with the means to deliver it. This formal planning approach, after Alfred Chandler and Peter Drucker, consists of integrated decisions, actions, or plans that will set and achieve viable organizational goals. Note the confident use of the word will. As Chaffee commented, in order to believe that making such decisions is not a waste of time, one must assume either that the environment is relatively predictable or else that the organization is well insulated from the environment. She asserts that use of the sequential linear model became less useful in the 1970s as, she says, the strategic problem came to be seen as much more complex. 40 years later, we don't agree that we've seen the last of this approach. We still see a lot of strategy that offers a roadmap based on a sequential set of activities and the assumption that it will be allowed to unfold as planned. That things don't go as expected then provides ample ground for skepticism about the worthiness of strategy itself. There are clearly many other problems and challenges around designing and implementing effective strategy. As Rumelt says, even bad strategy can be successful sometimes, as with a stopped clock that is correct twice a day. But we believe these three issues we've highlighted are the most common, but often unrecognized of all. Firstly, that strategy tries to be everywhere and everything. Secondly, that strategy is rarely focused on the interactions and connections between an organization's internal and external environments. And thirdly, that most strategy fails to account for complexity. And yet, there remain all these books and articles and all those strategy consultants that promise to deliver an approach to strategy that will work. Rumelt again. There are three simple secrets to success that illustrate the formulaic approach to strategy. First, he says, with his tongue in his cheek, aim high. If you aim low, you'll never wind up high. Number two is never give up. If you give up, you'll never get there. And number three, don't think too much, so you don't question number one and two. Alternatively, he advises, go carve your company name on a tree and bury a dead cat underneath it. His point is that much strategy advice is little more than superstition and fluff. Perhaps more usefully, Rumelt then describes strategy as an imposition on a system. And we use that as our start point to switch focus now to how strategy's bad name might be rescued.
So, to deal with our first concern, if strategy is currently perceived to be everywhere and everything, we suggest that definitions are important. It's not just semantics. We spoke earlier about definitions of strategy that are all encompassing to include goals, activities and resources, ends, ways, means. Of course, in the abstract, strategy may indeed encompass all of these things. But in practice, we believe it is critical to break down its component parts into what might be called levels of engagement. At the highest level, strategy should be fed by policy, an overarching intention to address a particular challenge or problem. Strategy is for the long term, but it doesn't mean it's infinite. And so whilst the overall policy should be to engage in pursuit of a huge blue sky aspiration, within that, strategies select a set of proximate, potentially more tangible and feasible goals or objectives. Therefore, while strategy in its wider sense may be an umbrella term for goals, resources, and activity, we suggest that strategic level of engagement might be best described as the level of an organization that is primarily engaged with the longer-term enduring objectives. The role of the strategic level, therefore, is to translate the imperatives of policy to proximate objectives or ends we are seeking. Thus, the important distinction between strategy in the abstract and strategic level of engagement. So what are the other components? For levels of engagement, all levels of engagement do we see in addition to the strategic level? Most obviously, there is a level at which activity is conducted. Given our military background, we're comfortable calling this the tactical level. It's the coalface, where things are done, the application of resources, the means. But this is not enough for strategy simply to attach planned activity direct to strategic objectives, even though this is what many methodologies advocate. There needs to be a process of translation so that all concerned can understand why specific activity is deemed necessary, how it contributes to those objectives, and what resources it requires to support it. Otherwise, there is a very high risk of misalignment over time. We subscribe to the view that this function is provided by a third level between the strategic and tactical levels, which has been termed the operational level of engagement. So, if objectives are aligned with strategic level engagement and activities associated with a tactical level, then what characterizes the operational level? The answer, we argue, is effects or required conditions. The operational level of engagement resources and coordinates tactical activity in order to realize required effect in the environment in support of the strategic level objectives.
The existence and contribution of the operational level, as many of you will know, is the subject of much debate in military circles from where it originated. But we believe that it's critical to the effective design and implementation of strategy in the abstract. It was brought home to me in 2003 when I heard a senior cabinet office official lament, we sort of know what we're trying to achieve in Iraq, and there's lots of good people doing lots of good things on the ground, but there's something missing in the middle to join it all up. It's also important if we're not to have this as a strategic framework. By framing strategy in the abstract around 3 levels of engagement, each with its specific responsibilities, we believe we clarify understanding of both the form and the function of strategy. Note we find it's sometimes useful to correlate this framework with an organization's portfolio of interests, its multidimensional programs, and its focused projects for delivery. This framework also provides a way of tying together the organization's objectives and internal construct with its activities, which are internally generated, through a set of operational level effects, which are realized largely in the external environment. In doing so, we begin to address our second problem, that of treating the internal and external environments and their interconnections as part of a single system. That's why Rummelt's description of strategy as an imposition on a system begins to gain traction. The simplest definition of a system is a set of autonomous components with their own energy sources connected together into a larger whole, with some common purpose or representation. A common analogy is an ant colony. People don't often realize they're constantly part of a system, experiencing their ant lives as a somewhat haphazard series of interactions with other ants, events, and circumstances. That relationship of potentially quite esoteric components doesn't have to be designed or deliberately assembled to exist as a system. There just has to be some degree of interdependency. The common purpose may be as complex as chaos. An anarchic system is a system, and systems change over time. This means that its complicated approach to dynamic systems can be so demoralizing that it stops people making progress. As the founder of the food chain Leon, Henry Dimbleby, said in 2021 about his government commission to develop a national food strategy, if change is this hard, is it even worth trying? So our second buttress against strategic skepticism and demoralization is to introduce elements of systems thinking into the process of strategy design. This need not be complex. Our start point, having first confirmed the problem statement, the strategic objectives, and understood as much of the nature of the problem set and the operating environment as can be seen, is to produce a description of the environment the system, at the point when our strategy might be deemed satisfied. We go to the end and work back. By describing the nature of the system at some point in the future, we instantly ensure that A, we don't have to know everything about the system as it exists now. B, we take into account elements of the external operating environment as well as the internal environment of our own organization. And C, we establish a common point of reference that can be understood by everyone as the headline driver for unified action. We call this description the operational end state. The next step is that we analyze the end state to identify the point of influence, tangible or intangible, that we believe does most to realize our end state conditions. We call that the center of gravity of the system. And we take, as part of our hypothesis, for that's what we're building, its role as the balance point of the system. From further analysis of the center of gravity we've selected, we derive a series of decisive effects that we believe might bring together the end state. This might all seem complicated, but it really isn't. It's taken as a series of connecting steps with logical analysis and creative thinking flowing through the process. These elements of strategy design link, or more appropriately nest together, to provide a conceptual working model or lens through which to approach our intervention into a system or our imposition on the system. We've integrated our thinking and understanding of our internal and external environments together rather than separate entities. Put another way, by producing some elements of strategy design in this manner, we offer the conceptual bridge between our strategic level objectives and tactical level activity, and it's one that can be communicated simply.
This takes us to resolving our third problem, that of predictability and linear thinking. In a complex adaptive system, change emerges as a result of the interactions. In a complex adaptive system, it's not just about simple actions equaling reactions. It's not Newtonian physics. Instead, it's more the world of Einstein and Bertalanffy, not linear, uncertain, and importantly, unpredictable. So why do so many strategists try to construct a roadmap that promises to take an organization from over here to over there in some sort of straight line? This is clearly doomed to failure, as highlighted earlier, the failure to consider the complexity of the system. We have to accept that once we start to interact in a system, and there will be a system even if we weren't able to map it before we're starting to act, the system will adapt. That's not just a single reaction to our activity, it's the sum total of all the actions of all the actors in the system, positive, negative, and ambivalent. And we may not see the resulting effect immediately after some time, or perhaps not even at all. So how do we get around all that? We suggest that two main principles should govern the approach. First, ensure that the implementation of the strategy is seamlessly connected with its design, so that feedback loops are created. Second, plan in detail only the next deliberate step. Become what Peter Senge calls a learning organization, so that activity can adapt to changing circumstances. This is in line with Henry Mintzberg's theory of emergent strategy. You recall that a key element of our strategy design was to construct a set of decisive effects that were assessed to be necessary in order to change the system as we wished. Our methodology further analyzes those effects to derive an initial set of activities. Once conducted, the resulting situation is assessed, and activity can be adjusted as thought necessary. Each subsequent set of activities should measure the extent to which the system has moved closer to the condition described by our end state. A further benefit of this approach is to empower those responsible for the delivery at the coalface, as they should be fully part of the process to determine suitable activity sets. They can therefore far better understand the context in which their specific project is operating. In turn, this also leaves line managers responsible for programs, a number of different projects or types of activity, able to focus on resourcing and coordinating activity rather than directing and delivery in detail.
So how do we restore the reputation and credibility of strategy? Well, it's our belief that the essence of strategy is in how the connection is made between objectives and activities, a creative process that provides gearing to the whole structure, and then between design and implementation, an iterative process that enables a learning organization to adapt its internal environment and shape its external environment. In addition, we realize that strategy is designing a way to deal with a particular challenge. It's a blueprint and a hypothesis, the context within which decisions are made. We have to accept that we're operating in a complex adaptive system and accept the hierarchy of strategy, the three levels of objectives, effects, and activity. We create linkages between them. Actions lie at the tactical level. Plan them one package at a time in accordance with the recognition of effects. Step towards the end state. Closing the gap becomes the focus for performance management. Be a learning organization. Any process that promises to deliver a strategy but doesn't take account of these key issues is, we strongly believe, doomed to failure. Strategy can recover from becoming a dirty word, but to do so, it must take an account of some practical realities, notably that all organizations exist, indeed coexist within a system, and it's the interactions with that system that must be managed. If strategy is ever described in one word, hopefully, for those of you that remember the beginning of this presentation, that word won't be Uzbekistan. Thank you very much for giving us your time this evening. One of the fascinating, and at times it must be said frustrating, things about strategy is that everyone's a strategist and everyone has an opinion about it. But this evening, we're genuinely interested to hear your opinions. So without further ado, we'll hand back to Stephen.
Thank you.